So if she has all of her stuff packed and the boxes at the door, is that a bad sign? What if you hear she's signed a lease on an apartment? Good sign? Oh, this is Between Two Priests, and I'm here with my friend Paul Ann Canty, and we're so glad that she's here tonight for this special live edition of Between Two Priests. Father Mike is here, and I hope that you'll ask some questions tonight of Paul Ann. But before we get started, I have a few questions for you. What exactly do you hope to get out of this process?
Really? That's your question?
Okay, here's a better one maybe. What brings you here today? Okay, serious question. I'll quit pretending like I'm the therapist. What percentage of your patients are just nuts?
You're really going to ask me that question, and you think I can answer it?
Okay, well, who's your favorite client?
Come on, we've talked about your ego. We've talked about the risk of narcissism. Do you really want to go there?
Shouldn't bring that up on the video, Paul. All right, I found this article today. 6 awkward things you must ask your therapist. If I could get my phone to work. Only the best technology here at Between Two Priests.
Good to know.
So, number 1 awkward thing, and we'll just go through these. Is there an issue or behavior you haven't revealed to me, Pauline?
Do you think I'm going to reveal an issue or a behavior to you?
The cameras are rolling. Oh, here's the second one. Actually, that's no good. Let's skip to the third one. Do you feel like we're making progress here?
We would probably make better progress if I had brought my pipe.
Well, on that note, let's get serious. I'm so glad that Paul Ann Canty is here today. And all of those fun, all that hilarious humor that we're engaging in there has a practical function of hopefully some folks signing on. We had Paul Ann do an interview at the beginning of the pandemic. What was the theme of that?
It seems like it was largely focused on marriage and
The stresses of
the
marriage.
stresses of marriage in the midst of a pandemic.
In the midst of a pandemic.
Yeah.
And since that time, we've had a continuing pandemic that gets
Correct.
better, worse, better, worse.
Yeah.
We have had a presidential election that's just
Better, worse, better, worse.
better, worse, better, worse. I've heard there's an asteroid headed for the planet.
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
And we just had an ice storm in our town.
Yes.
It just keeps getting better. 2020 just keeps sending it our way. But now, almost 6 months after that first conversation, any advice for for folks trying to get through this?
I don't know if this measures up to advice or not, but I was thinking earlier today about, I think, at least I went into this, I think, thinking of it a little more as a sprint.
Mm-hmm.
And so just go all out and get to the end of it and you're done. And I think we've discovered that it is maybe not even a marathon. It may be one of those hotter than 100-mile races.
Bike race.
And we're in it for the long haul, and so we have to pace ourselves.
Okay.
I was also thinking earlier today about just what it looks like to be gracious, to offer some grace to ourselves and to other people, which is hard when we feel like we've drawn the short end of the stick and things are going south in some ways, or there's a lot of unpredictability. I think the uncertainty
Right.
is hard. Most of us maybe know how to, if there's some level of certainty about when I can anticipate the end of this, or that if I do these 5 things, it's gonna be helpful, but there's a great deal of uncertainty.
Right.
And I think that makes it hard, because our skill set doesn't always match up. I think I had mentioned earlier that if, you play a sport, Father Tom?
I do. I play, it seems cliche, but I play golf.
Okay, all right.
I've also like soccer and
Okay.
riding bikes and
Okay, so if you think about the game of golf, and you know that there are maybe a significant number of variables in the game of golf, but you also build on your own talent and ability, and you learn a certain skill set to play the game of golf. And then you go out on the course one day and you're set to play, and you're taking into account the variables. And about the time you swing and hit the ball toward the first hole, the hole moves. And maybe all of a sudden there's a water course where there wasn't one when you hit the ball, and a course that maybe you've played on 1,000 times and know well, which allows you to work with some of those pieces that aren't in your control. Now all of a sudden that course is completely new to you every time, because there's some unknown, some lack of certainty about something. And it feels to me that that's about what it's like with the pandemic, that suddenly the playing field is kind of up for grabs.
right. Father Mike and I have talked a lot about that, because, and Beth, how many times have we had an event planned
Yes,
that we had to cancel
yeah,
this week because of the ice storm?
yeah.
And so, as you said, the course keeps changing.
Right.
What's the coping skill for
You know,
rapidly changing situations?
Yeah, I wish there was a concrete, easy answer. You just do this thing or these 5 things and that takes care of it. I was thinking earlier today, you know, that as humans, we have 2 pretty basic drives. One of them is to be a self, and the other one is to be in relationship with other people. And it struck me that part of, we can look at all the bad stuff about the pandemic, and there's plenty of it. It can be, I mean, you could frighten yourself into just a fetal position if you think about all of the possibilities. But I think it also is providing us with an opportunity to really begin to offer some grace and care to ourselves and self-understanding. For some people, I'm pretty introverted in spite of how I may appear to people, and so for the first 3 months it was like a gift that I had to kind of quarantine at home and not be around a lot of people, because that's an energy, it expends energy. I like to do it, but it still is an expensive energy.
Right.
But I'm at a point now where even I'm thinking, okay, cabin fever, I'm ready to get out. But to be able to say, okay, when I have to have these alone times, can I really get to know myself? Can I do some introspective work? Can I take care of me? Can I make sure that I'm tending to me as a person? I think it's also given us an opportunity to relate to one another in a different way. I've talked with families who are playing board games every night, or they're really spending a lot of time together as a family and may have returned to eating meals together.
Right.
Those kinds of things, where the press of the schedule before, it's easy to let those things fall off the radar screen. So there's some of those pieces about how can I, is this an opportunity for me to know myself better, because I'm forced to sit and think and forced to face some uncertain things. At my age, I think, you know, I kind of walk along that balance of, I don't want to completely withdraw from the world and life experiences, but I'm also aware that I'm in a high-risk age group. And so, do I have a guarantee that I won't catch COVID and you know, have a difficult recovery or no recovery at all? We don't know that for sure. So there's that push And again, that can be an internal thing and a relational thing, the push to decide, how am I going to use this time that I have? And how am I gonna manage the things that do seem completely out of my control?
Right. Has anyone asked anything, Father Mike?
We've got several people watching. Nobody's asked a question yet. But I have one.
Okay.
Pauline, one of the things that I think a lot of people are experiencing at this point, particularly with reference to COVID, is a feeling of fatigue. They've reshaped their lives, they've made changes, they had that, period of excitement, even new energy,
Right.
new time and the rest. And now all of a sudden, it's slowly dawning on us that this is a long-term kind of thing. I'm bad at making long-term habit changes.
Yeah.
And especially when they're attended by all of this anxiety. Are there ways of helping us make the shift from thinking of it as a sprint to thinking of it as a marathon?
It's a great question.
Yeah, it is, and this may sound weird, the first thing that pops into my head for, I think all of us, is before we do anything to pause and take a breath. To just pause and take a breath. I think we think of empty space as not valid or having no purpose. And yet the empty space is a part of the whole. If we think of a piece of music, the rest, the absence of sound is a critical piece of that music and is every bit as important as the notes that may surround it. And so I think, we're not very comfortable in our culture with stillness or silence. I think we tend to think of it as a waste of time because it's something that, even though it may have a profound internal effect and even a profound effect between two people who are sharing silent space or quiet space, we don't measure that well because we measure things by activity. How many things can I count? What got produced out of that? And if it's something inside of me, that's not easily measured. So I think the first thing I would say would be to just stop and take a breath. And following that, I think to begin looking at what if there are positive things that can come out of this stressful situation, and how do I want to be prepared to embrace those? And in no way do I want to imply that I'm flying up here all the time, because that's not true. I think this is hard on all of us, and there are certainly days that I meet with clients and I think, I'm not sure I should even be talking to them because I'm struggling with some of these same things. And so how do we say this is a part of a struggle, but struggle doesn't have to be bad.
Right.
Struggle can be opportunity to learn. And I was thinking earlier today, after meeting with people throughout the day, that resilience is not perfection. That resilience isn't, I knocked it out of the park every time. Resilience says, I may have done a face plant, but I'm crawling toward the finish line some days. Now, some days it may indeed be I knocked it out of the park. But to allow for a variety of things there that say, I'm still showing up. It makes me think of the 4 agreements of Don Miguel Ruiz saying 100% is the best you have to give, and it doesn't always look like this. And in a pandemic, 100% may look very different than 100% looked like in 2018 or 2019. And so can we not judge ourselves based on that, but to say this is where I am, and maybe I am just barely putting one foot in front of the other, but I'm staying engaged, I'm taking time out for respite. If it gave all of us permission to slow down a little bit, would that be a bad thing?
Pauline, I'll ask a personal question.
Okay.
You're talking about shifting course and how the rules keep changing. As a priest or minister, the big story is all the depression in ministry among ministers right now.
Yeah.
And I know that's in every field right now, unless you're making masks or hand sanitizer.
Right.
But but we adapted, none of us signed up that I know of to be TV producers
Right.
or to not be able to see our parishioners in the hospital
Yeah.
or even see them at their home, or you know what I'm saying. So that's an example of the shifting. What do you say to someone who's depressed, who's thinking about making a drastic change out of a career or a family or a marriage or a whatever?
Wow. I think I first would go back to that pause and take a breath. Because we get tunnel vision in those moments. I read an article a while back, I think it may have been in the Baptist News, I don't remember where, but it was an article by a minister who had been with a group of ministers in a meeting, 15, I think 15 or 20 of them. And one of them was bold enough to say that they were struggling with the idea of taking their own life. And by the end of that meeting, there were, I'm going to say, over half of those ministers saying that they had, at some level, contemplated something like that because they couldn't see beyond where they were at that moment. And for a minister, I mean, you would be the expert on this, but I can speak as a therapist. I think it's a slippery slope if we begin to feel that somehow we should be above all of these feelings and we should have all the answers. And because then that means the reality is I don't have all the answers, but now I can't even sit in shared space with somebody and think out loud about that, or say I'm really struggling today, or I don't know for sure where to go from here. And that's a hard one. I wouldn't fault someone if they make it, and for some people they may feel that they're backed into a corner where they must make a change. I'm aware that financially things are happening with places of worship, with people not being present, and so how do you sustain something? And I think that's a hard one.
Right. Or your career is literally a risk to public health.
Yes, yeah.
So,
Well, I think it forces us to find other ways to connect, to
Yeah.
think outside the box. To one of the things I've again had to, I was a real holdout for any kind of telehealth therapy because I just think it's important to sit in the room with people and to pick up on body language, to just even the sense that you get from shared space with someone that sometimes is so subtle. And so I really kind of held off as long as I could and went kicking and screaming toward the idea of doing therapy via Zoom. I still would prefer to sit in the office with people, but if my option is for no one to get seen, or to say we'll figure out how, we're incredibly adaptable as humans, and I think that may have bothered me more than it bothers the people that I'm meeting with. And I've discovered there are ways we can pick up on some of those things, and sometimes some of our greatest inventions, our greatest evolutionary kinds of changes in thinking come out of a dark place.
Right.
And it would be a shame if we think that can't happen now. Now, do I get up every day and say, yay, what are we going to get out of today? No. I will tell you, I'm not a cloudy weather person, and so I'm hoping that Friday really is a sunny day, because if the sun comes out, my energy will go up immediately by about 10 or 20%.
Yes.
But to be able to say, I'm operating at about 10% today, and to be able to trust that you're not going to judge me for that, and that in a way that gives you permission to say, I'm only at about 15. Well, then we can go somewhere from there.
Right.
In that conversation.
So when ministers have a lot of people come to us grieving.
Yeah.
That's probably the most common kind of visit we have. And I always tell parishioners or anybody, if they lost a spouse,
Right.
The general thing and my mom did it. I need to sell my house right away
Yeah.
and get out of here, change everything. And I always say, wait a year. I know it's hard,
Yeah.
but wait. Is there any, I feel like that's what you're saying.
I think that's part of the implication in taking a breath. That I'm gonna pause. And I think we can even tell ourselves, I won't decide anything for a month. Or I will look at what kind of resources do I have, if it's a financial thing, or are there other paths to get to where I'm wanting to get to. But if my back's really against the wall, because I think there really are much fewer true emergencies.
Mm-hmm.
I think for the most part, we have more time than we think we have to slow down and to ask ourselves, am I looking at this through a pretty tunnel vision view? Have I talked with have I bounced this off of anybody? Have I talked, or am I just carrying all this
Right.
by myself? And having people that we can hold space with, and I expect you see in your work, people might come to you and ask you a question. I doubt you always have a real ready answer to give them, and it can
Hardly
be risky.
ever.
Yeah, because it can be risky, in fact, to say, I'll give you the answer, I'll decide for you, because they're gonna live with the outcome of the actions that are taken on
Right.
behalf of that. So I think a lot of what we do is hold space with each other. We become the container that holds what they hand us as they're thinking out loud.
Right.
And often, even if we don't say much, they get to the end, they're clearer because they've heard themselves say some of
Right.
these things, and they're more clear about, well, maybe I'm not willing to do that yet. Or with the couple thing, I find not just couples, in our relationships, but certainly with couples, I find that often, I think people are really trying to get to the same place, but they think that's what they're arguing about.
Right.
Getting to a different place, and more often than not, if you want to call it an argument or the difference of opinion, disagreement is often more about what route are we going to take to get there, what's it going to look like, and that can settle people sometimes when we recognize, oh, we're really not arguing about the outcome or the end result, we're just trying to find our way through this, and we're each speaking our own language, what it's going to look like to do that.
Right. Any comments on the live stream?
No, like I said, we've got several people who are watching, but they all seem really intent on, I think they're
Therapists
hanging
are
on every
scary to
word.
people sometimes.
I would like to ask, I don't want to describe maybe as a more positive question, but when I was studying Chinese history, that was my undergraduate degree, very useful in Oklahoma.
Chinese history,
Chinese
ladies and
history.
gentlemen.
And the history of the Great Leap Forward and some of the stuff that happened in China, there's some very awful stories. It seemed like every time I talked to somebody from China during that period, every story I heard was worse than the last.
Right.
And then one day I met a man who said, it was all right. No, I really? He said, yeah, I just stayed at home and learned how to cook.
Wow.
I'm curious to know, as you've talked with your clients, what have been the most positive, uplifting things that you're hearing from people? Are people trying new things? Are they exploring new dimensions?
I think there are people, both clients and just friends and colleagues that people I'm aware of in our community. Leanne Henry's RBG thing, some of those pieces have grown out of a disruptive time. A time where we feel compelled to do something. But I've had people that have had time to read. I've had people that have learned a lot of both family, friends, and people that I talk with in a therapy room who have learned new skills, who have gone back to old skills. That if we go back to that, let's slow down and have some nice experiences in life, maybe things that they enjoyed doing or were of benefit to them in years past, but life got too busy, and so now they're going back to that. I think we are discovering, in some ways, and maybe the good news and the bad news, we're discovering our relationships. Our parents are discovering children, children are discovering parents. we're discovering the joys that some of us maybe grew up with years ago, in terms of we didn't have a TV in every room to go cloister ourselves away. And so we're having more conversation, and I think sometimes we think that has to be this finished product with a lovely casing and everything, rather than just, life is really just a rough draft after rough draft. And can I just show up, and it's okay to come back later and say, that question you asked me before, and I told you this, and now I've been thinking about it, and I'm thinking maybe it's really more this. Well, that's relationship. That is communicating in order to connect and to relate to each other and to know and be known, rather than I'm going to try to one-up you, or I'm going to argue about something or prove something to you.
So, if you had to say, I know you say you just got done saying you can't answer any questions, but we want to leave folks with something practical. What's one skill or one practice? I know I want to advocate, prayer, but I want to know your answer. What's one practice that somebody could take to help themselves give themselves space, slow down?
I think a couple of things. First thing that popped into my head when you said that was moving, because we know that when we are feeling overwhelmed or depression's beginning to set in, there is the tendency to just shut down and sleep a lot, or just sit and stare at a wall, or lose ourselves in some ongoing television show or something that we're really not even watching, we're just checking out. And movement, getting up and moving around, has huge benefit for us. And on many levels, it changes our perspective, because I'm suddenly looking at something, literally looking at something from a different space. It may be something that I engage with other people, walking the dog. It doesn't have to be, I don't have to run a marathon to do that, but can I find movement that is a fit for me? And that may be strolling up and down the block. It may be making sure that I'm moving around the house doing things, but I think movement is one thing. For some people, this would not be true for everybody, but for some people, some type of journaling, something that takes it out from inside and puts it on paper, I think can be of benefit, because we're no longer carrying it just as this mass inside. Those are two things I think are helpful, and showing up with somebody and saying, I just don't want to be alone right now, or I want to hang, or I need to step away for 5 minutes, in terms of regulating our coming and going with each other, rather than ignoring those signals. I think getting to know what our own body and psyche is signaling to us that we need, and learning to listen to that, and that it's okay to attend to that, that it's okay to say, thanks for asking, I just am not going to be available today, please ask again sometime, rather than thinking if you ask, it is not okay for me to say no. Sometimes saying no at the right time and saying yes at the right time are important behaviors.
Father Mike, any follow-up or last thoughts? Last question?
I guess my last question would be, what are you reading right now?
Great question.
I tend, when I was in graduate school, and I don't know, it was just a fluke, I guess, that I did this, but one of the best things I ever did. I just committed that I guess I'd heard so many stories about just losing yourself down a rabbit hole of graduate school and only reading textbooks. And I just said, we're still going to do family vacations. I'm going to have a life, and I'm going to read works of fiction. And that probably informed my graduate school experiences. Made it richer, I think, because I was bringing those experiences from reading fiction. I've not done as well at that since my graduate school days. I tend to read a lot of fiction because
Mhm.
there's so many things of interest. But one of the books that I finished recently that I would certainly recommend to anybody is Sue Monk Kidd's The Book of Longings. Fascinating, thought-provoking book, and a real courageous right for her to put herself out there. That was uplifting and just thought-provoking in a lot of ways, having been raised in a church setting, and just hearing tenets that all of a sudden what happens if you look at it from a slightly different position, the what if kind of things. Book that I just started, I'm barely into, but I've intended to read for a long time. My mother's side of the family is Cherokee, and so I started reading the book 1491, which is about the Americas before Columbus arrived. And I'm anticipating that it will be informative, and probably I will be really aggravated through some of it. But I'm trying to get back to reading a little wider variety of things. I love Brene Brown's books. Read Untamed recently by Glennon Doyle Melton.
Brene Brown is an Episcopalian.
Yes, she is. She is indeed. And I just appreciate her candor and her honesty in terms of her own growth as a person.
So I can relate to that a lot because I'm definitely a nonfiction person, and in 10 years or 18 years of marriage, my wife has been telling me, read some fiction. And so during the pandemic, I started. I'm only on, 3 or 4 books, but it does take your mind off of the.
Well, and I think it gives you another lens to that. What I found in graduate school was so many of the fictional things I was reading, the stories in them were applicable to what I was learning and experiencing and
Right.
exploring in graduate school, and so it gave another foundation to look at those pieces. I think it creates balance, but I just, there's so many nonfiction books out there that I feel are critical for me to gather information from, that it's really hard not to.
It's overwhelming.
Yes, hard not to go down that path.
So no questions before we sign off?
Well, we did get one from Linda Carpenter,
Okay.
who asks, and this is a deep one.
I hope I'm
So
right.
it comes right at the very end of our time. So she says, I know I love God, and I believe in His Son Jesus. That's deeply embedded in me, but I've lost my trust. They go hand in hand, love and trust. How do I find my way back to trust?
I don't know if this is exactly what it's not the perspective maybe that she's looking at this from, but when I meet with couples who often come and say we need to learn to communicate, but we don't communicate, which is impossible. We communicate all the time, and we have trust issues. And I've come over the years to think that it's a little bit of a slippery slope if I need to rebuild trust because that's dependent on what someone else or something does to restore my trust to me. And that seems like it has a lot of variables in it. I have to count on them doing what I need them to do at the right time. And so I've come to think of really the core piece being, can I make sure that I'm maintaining my integrity, that I'm growing in my integrity? And I think that's a trust piece, but that's all on me. And because I don't need you to do something different in order for me to be a person of integrity. Now, when you bring God into the picture, I wish, as just for me personally, I wish we really knew in a very tangible, visceral way that we can go to God and say, I really don't like you much right now. It doesn't feel like you're holding up your end of the bargain. Or I feel like maybe you sold me a bill of goods. And I think sometimes we think God is going to just evaporate or something if we do that. But if He's really God, then surely He can sit with us in that. And in that regard, I think that's a process across time, much like you know, if we have an injury or a loss, there's gonna be some span of time that's gonna feel so fresh that I think it would be almost, unrealistic to think that we could walk around as though it didn't happen, or as though we hadn't come to that conclusion. But to also have an understanding that there's at least the possibility that across time, there's gonna be, healing or information, more experience, a mixture of both. And maybe, I guess if I were gonna challenge, one thing, it would be to challenge people to say, if I'm gonna say that I've lost trust in this, can I match it with some place that I have not lost trust? Something that I do believe is sustained, something that I can count on. Because sometimes, you know, the thing that hurts, we look at that thing. I think, again, I work with so many couples, I think if I'm a part of a couple and I'm afraid that my spouse is not going to be faithful to me, and I long for there to be connection and faithfulness, I think it's just human nature that I'm going to be constantly monitoring the horizon, looking for evidence of unfaithfulness. And if I'm looking for that, I'm probably going to see something that I can construe as that, and maybe it is, but maybe not. But I'm not focused on all of the things that are also there that are demonstrating faithfulness to me. And I think that's just, if I don't want to be hurt, then I start looking for evidence that I'm about to be. So I can protect myself. And I have a feeling we kind of do that with trust sometimes too, that if trust has been broken in some way, then I don't want that to happen again, so I begin to look for the possibility of it everywhere. I pull away, I lose the holding space with people. We probably need to be a lot better about being candid about, I mean, thank you to her for asking that candid question, because I doubt she's the only one who has entertained that thought.
For sure.
Or had that question. And so sometimes the first step is to say it. So we can say, oh my gosh, I feel that way too sometimes. I'm not sure that the ground is gonna hold me up when I stand on it. And so how do we navigate that?
Thank you, that's wonderful.
Every time you're here with us, I feel like I learn about 10 new things.
Oh, well, thank you. That's nice, because I really feel like a novice when I'm sitting in these spots.
Speaking of that, what do you think of the set?
I love it.
High
Spared
quality,
notes,
right?
You know,
Yeah, spared no expense.
I think it really supports what we've talked about in regard to simplicity and calming and going back to the basics. How's that for a reframe?
That's what we were thinking.
I thought that's what you had in mind.
Yeah. Thank you for being with us
You're
tonight,
welcome.
Paul.
Thank you for asking.
Thanks for everyone who joined us. And this recording will not go away. It'll be on our wall and on our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all Linda said.